It's great to see you all. My name is Rachel Dugan. I am a field representative for Congressman Scott Peters here in San Diego, and I also help out with our grants program here in the district office. And now I'm going to hand it over to Congressman Peters, and he's going to be introducing our panelists here today.
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us to learn more about federal grant opportunities for housing. In the past, my office has hosted these events to help the federal grant region and in our state and in the country, which is housing. With the number of unhoused people rising in San Diego, including veterans, seniors, youth, and seniors, many hardworking advocates, nonprofits, and others are looking for ways to alleviate the problem. And that's why we're pleased to have two experts speak with us today about how we can help the San Diego community obtain federal money to ensure that we have more housing, which is just what we need. Rachel, as she mentioned, is a member of my staff who assists with grants. She's going to moderate the event and help answer any questions about how our office can help in this process. And our two panelists today will cover the basics when it comes to applying for federal grants, specifically for housing. So the first panelist is Dr. Pat Leslie. Through her consulting work at Urban Initiatives and the Regional Task Force on Homelessness, Dr. Leslie provides grant writing, strategic planning, technical assistance, training, and problem solving to housing and homelessness organizations and nonprofits throughout Southern California. Our second panelist is Dr. Deme Hill. She provides training and technical guidance on federal regulations, and she has successfully helped secure major federal funding to support homeless youth in San Diego. Throughout her career, Dr. Hill has managed and facilitated government programs funded by several federal departments, including the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Education, Department of Labor, and others. So thanks to Dr. Hill and Dr. Leslie for taking the time to share your expertise today. Folks, they'll be answering questions at the end of their presentations, and their contact information will also provide that. So thanks again for joining, and thank you for your work to help those in need of a home. And Rachel, I'll turn it back to you. I hope it's a good session.
Thank you.
Is everyone good? Can everyone see it?
Yes, we can. Do you want to turn it to full screen for the slideshow? So there we go. There we go. Thank you. Right. So Rachel, shall I just jump in here now? All right. So our thanks to Congressman Peters and Rachel, to you for your invitation and your help in allowing us to join today. And we do thank others who are on the call for joining us as well. So we're here to explore some of the basics about getting federal grants. And as Congressman said, one of our specialties is housing. So many webinars have panels, right, where individuals speak, and they're sometimes connected and sometimes they're not. In our case today, we're a tag team. And so Dr. Hill and I have worked together frequently. We aren't always seamless, but we are definitely interactive. Dr. Hill, comments before we charge in?
Great to see you all and ready to jump right in.
Okay, so then let's get started. Next slide, please, Rachel. So today, a little bit of context for today's section. There are multiple sources of information that come together to make for today's session. It was developed for an array of participants. It was developed starting from basics as though you know nothing. So please don't take offense if it's like, we already know all of that. We want to get to the good stuff, right? So don't take offenses if we start below your capacity, right? So please put any of your comments or your questions in the chat box so that we can address them at the end, or should we run out of time, that we can also address them through Rachel afterwards. And as I said earlier, we do have a team approach. Next slide, please. So what's in this session? The core sections of today are an overview of the federal grant resources, the essential rules for applying for grants, how to look for the types of resources you are looking for, right? Ways to find federal resources that match what you are looking for, how to prepare in advance for a grant application, and tips for successful competing for and securing resources, and then some questions and answers at the end. Next slide, please. So essential rules, the number one focus, the number one rule, please write this down and etch it in capital letters for you. The number one focus of grant writing is not about getting money. Now that might sound a little unusual, but it is not about getting money. It is about partnering to achieve a specific mission or goal. That's how you're successful. Don't chase resources that do not fit with your goal and the federal goal. So if it's money and you're like, well, we could stretch our organization, or we might be able to try that. We've never tried that before. It may not be your best effort to step into that arena first, right? And be aware that this is not free money, right? You can't use this money just any way you want once you've been awarded it. You need to use it in the way that you wrote the award. And it does come with administrative responsibilities, and it comes with reporting responsibilities, and may be tied to other federal requirements. If you're awarded, you need to be prepared to do what you said you were going to do in your application. So be realistic. Sometimes when you're writing an application, it's like, oh, this would sound so much better. Let me say this. Make sure that whatever you're saying is something you can deliver on when you are awarded. Next slide. So there are lots of federal resources, hundreds of them actually. There are multiple lead federal departments, and there's an A to Z index at that click that you see on your screen, and we'll provide it at the end as well. There are a variety of programs. Each department has a variety of programs. Each program has its own funding objectives tied to a departmental goal. There are different application formats for different departments and different grants. For example, there's a grants.gov center, which operates a number of granting opportunities. There's also an eSNAPS opportunity and a Conjoint opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. There are timelines associated with grants, right? There are various funding objectives. There are different application formats and request processes and mechanisms for applying. They have different timeframes that might be rather different than what you're thinking. Is that sometimes the grant turnaround is you'll apply in September and you'll hear in the following March. And that would be a very typical scenario for housing and urban development funds, which, by the way, the 2023 notice of funding availability was just announced today. So there may be varying definitions for terms that seem very familiar to you or that seem similar between grants, right? Some familiar definitions, terms, may not have the same definition in federal granting arenas. So, for example, a term like operations or overhead or administration may be quite different in each of the funding sources. Or the term senior might refer to someone who's 50, 55, 60, 62, or 65 plus, depending upon not only the funding source, but the particular grant that you're applying for. The focus is on today, on grant resources, not on vendor contracting, not on contracting for services. And so as we walk through this, recognize that there are other avenues for receiving funds through the federal government as well, but they're not the grant resources. Next slide, please. So finding federal resources, how to efficiently find federal resources, right? The first step is to know what you're looking for. What type of resource are you after? Are you looking for training assistance, technical assistance on how to operate something or how to connect with the resources or operate resources? Are you looking for capital development to build something new? Are you looking for community development and infrastructure to support a program? Are you looking for program startup for a brand new program and one-time funding to get it started, and then you'll take it over in another manner? Capacity development. You've got an organization that started and needing some more support to grow. Are you looking for direct client services? Any of those may take you to different grant resources. Next slide, please. So Finding federal resources continued is that what do you need to know? What needs do you need to be able to address? As the congressman said, we focus on housing much of the time, but there's also services, healthcare, emergency response. Are you looking to support a particular group like seniors or youth? Depending upon what you want to address will help direct you to which department within the federal government you want to apply for. So for example, for housing, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has housing as its first name and is a likely source of resources for housing, right? Whereas Health and Human Services, you might say, oh, we're looking for healthcare and supports for persons with AIDS or persons with renal disease. And so Health and Human Services might be a better fit, right? How do you intend to use the funds if they're awarded? You need to know that in advance to have some idea about if the application you're about to submit fits what you want to do, right? Again, which departments match your areas in terms of actions and goals? So housing and urban development makes sense. What language is being used by that department or program? Do they call it housing? Do they call it shelter? Are shelter and housing different? They are. What other information is publicly available about that resource in that department? It's important to get to know your potential partner, right? So looking at resources, looking at other documents that have been published, looking at what's online and available and noticed by the department, by the funding source, is an important step into finding your resource. So if you know what you're looking for, you'll know when you found it, right? So thinking in advance about what you want to achieve is an important step, and we're going to see that again in another moment or two. So search for resources that mirror your goals and search for resources in the most likely areas of finding it. Next slide, please. So getting information about federal resources, making government services easier to find is a link on the USA.gov website. And you can see that, read that in detail. There are register for the listservs for the departments that you're interested in or the populations or services you're interested in. There's the A to Z index, which we talked about, which has a comprehensive nested series of resources, and grants.gov, which you're seeing the top of that, you can go in and you can search in grants.gov for grant opportunities given a keyword, and it'll pull up all of the current resources available through grants.gov for that particular type of keyword that you've put in. So register for listservs, make sure you look at indexes, do your homework, and looking at making government services easier. So next slide, please. Applying for grant resources, funds availability. You want to first know the type of funding that's being announced. So an entitlement fund versus a competitive fund. Entitlement funds are those that are allocated to jurisdictions, cities and counties, states, right? Where they are, by virtue of their entity, entitled to be able to apply for some funds that you as a nonprofit are not able to apply for. Many of those are done by formula, and so the particular amount of money that is awarded to a city or a county is driven by the entitlement grant. In some cases, there's also application or additional funds available. But for the most part, if you're a nonprofit in the community seeking funds, you're going to be looking at competitive funding where you are applying for and competing against others to receive a specific set of funds. And the notices of funds availability come in a variety of forms. There's a notice of funding availability that tells you here's the amount of dollars that are available and here's what it's for. It's a little bit of a passé term for how at this point, Housing and Urban Development now tends to use notice of funding opportunity that tells you what might be available, what could be available, and gives you the directions on how to apply. A request for proposal is when the federal government has a particular type of proposal, a particular type of resource that they're looking to have filled, and they're looking for you to provide with them a description of how you would meet that goal and objective for them, and a request for qualifications where they already know exactly what they want, and they're looking to see if you're a qualified provider. Do you have the history and the capacity to provide the services that they're looking for? And then they can select among them. Next slide, please. So common elements in any one of those notices, right? Public notices will include who is offering the funding to whom, so what department of the federal government and what program, and who the agency that is offering it, and who they're offering it to. Are they offering it to nonprofits? Are they offering it to governmental entities? It's important to note here that in most cases, federal grant funds are not, for-profit organizations do not apply for federal grant funds. They're restricted from applying, right? So who is eligible to receive funds? Again, it will typically say a legal entity that is a nonprofit, 501c3, a tribal council, etc. What purpose or activities the funds can be spent for, right? What is the primary goal of that particular funding? When the funds will be available and when applications are due, very important aspects of any announcement. Why the funds are available, what are the federal goals and objectives for releasing these dollars, how much is available, and how to apply. A lot of information in quite often many pages of technical language. Next slide, please. So what to look for in those notices then? So we've just looked at what typically is in a notice, right? Now, what next? We want you to look at the language that's used in the notice. If it says shall or will, then it is a requirement of that grant, is that it's not optional. If it says you shall provide 50 units of housing in low-income areas, it's not an option. That's a requirement of the funding source. If it says may, should, could, or can, it means that it's optional. And you get to determine which of those activities you want to include, right? So again, shall and will, no option. Other language means that it's more flexible and you get to choose. And although you get to choose, we will note that there are preference and priorities quite often identified in a funding release for funding. There are also very important details in those packages. For example, limits on pages or narratives. And this one is very unusual in that it's very particular in that the limit may be a limit on characters. You may have 1,000 characters to answer this question, right? And characters mean it includes spaces and punctuation as well. And so a helpful hint is to draft your narratives in a word processing program first so that you can cut and paste it into the grant application. And word to the wise is when you do cut and paste it into the application, make sure that the application itself didn't add additional spaces at the beginning or between sentences as a matter of format. You'll need to take those out to meet your character limit, right? It will also, the notices will also tell you about evaluation and selection processes. Take a close look at them. Are some components worth more points than others? Pay closer attention to those that are worth more points, because you could spend a lot of time on 3 sections that are worth a total of 30 points and miss on 2 sections that are worth 50 points in total, right? So as you look through the notices, make sure you're also paying attention to what they're looking for in terms of evaluation and selection. And when a component is valued at a higher level of points, then you know that that is a primary concern in this grant application. You also, if you want to decide, what is it I should choose if it says shall or should or could, excuse me, what is it I should choose if it says can or may or should, then you want to also reference best practices for that particular population, housing source, or region, right? Best practice information is available through many resources, including the federal websites quite often. Next slide, please. So what else to look for in those notices? You may have heard the phrase, the devil's in the details, right? And it is essential to pay attention to details in the grant application notices, right? Pay attention to the definitions. Again, a senior may be defined as 55 or could be defined as 62. So we're going to move now and look at, take an area in terms of, again, looking at the restriction of funds and what else is required. Does it require matching funds, attachments, compliance with other regulations? Each of those may sound small and embedded, however, can be onerous when you go to operate. Next slide, please. So be ready to respond. Things that you can prepare in advance. The typical sections, as we've said, include agency capacity, both administrative and fiscal, experience with the type of service, population, or project type, evidence of your prior success, right? Measurable goals, personnel descriptions, and budget categories. Each of those, and including what will be your sources of match or leverage, each of those are items that you can help prepare in advance. And in fact, you can prepare these in small snippets like paragraphs or sentences that can be easily cut and pasted together to create the narrative that you want in a particular application, and so that you can readily have a consistent story about your organization as well. Next slide, please. So preparing in advance as well, things that you can do right now, you can do today, you can do tomorrow, would be to register in the System of Awards Management, the SAM system, which is a requirement for almost all federal resources. It will, in your registration, you will describe your organization, you will identify an authorized organizational representative and an e-business point of contact. You will be assigned a unique identity unique identifier. It used to be a DUNS number, and now it's a unique identifier. And those are required as part of your application package, right? And in grants.gov, you won't be able to submit unless you have those, right? So you can register in grants.gov. You can become a registrant to grants.gov and begin exploring that search in terms of what's available in grants.gov currently. You need to identify who your primary writers are and your e-business point of contact. And that e-business point of contact needs to be the same person that's in your SAMS registration, right? You can also, as a resource is released, set up a workstation, a work form for people to join together in terms of completing the application. You can also register in eSnaps, and eSnaps is the application portal for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Although the notices will be in grants.gov, your application will be completed through eSnaps for HUD. You can go in and create an applicant profile for yourself, an individual. You can go in and create a profile for your organization, and you can register your or file your code of conduct with the federal government currently. And once you're on the list, it stays on the list for an extended period of time. All of those things are things you can do before that grant notice is released and gives you 60 or 90 days to respond, right? So those are things that you can do now. So all of that background information is ways to get started in successfully applying for a grant. And I'm going to turn it to Dr. Hill, who's going to tell you a little bit about how that actually worked in San Diego for a major grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for a particular population. Take it away, Deme, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Deme Hill, and I'm super excited to be here with you all today to talk about a really cool project in San Diego. Can you advance the slide for us, Rachel, please? So in 2016, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which funds housing throughout the nation, services, and particularly homeless services, decided to put a stamp on youth homelessness to try to end it throughout the country. And that year in 2016 was the first time HUD really put forth money just for youth. It was $33 million And they had 10 awards that they planned on giving throughout the country. And they had over 120 applicants who applied for that funding. San Diego was actually one of those organizations that said, hey, we want to try to get this fund, these funds for San Diego to end youth homelessness. And we didn't win that round. And interestingly, that round helped San Diego apply the following year, because when you do apply for a federal grant, you can go back to the funder and ask for what's called a debrief. Can you tell me what I did well and tell me what I did wrong? And so San Diego, we got our paper back, and I think we scored like a 69 out of 100. So we were just shy of 70% out of 100. So what we decided to do was call up Austin, Texas, who had one, and they had like the #1 scoring application in the nation at the time. And we said, what did you guys do? Can you help us? And Austin came through in spades. They really helped us to craft a new application for the 2017 round, which we didn't know HUD was going to come with 2017. It was kind of like, are they going to fund youth again? Are they not? So at the time, it was really kind of just a new initiative by HUD. Since then, HUD has provided $368 million worth of funding to end youth homelessness throughout the country in several rounds. They just wrapped up applications for round 6. San Diego actually won the round in round 2, and was the organization in the nation, which was through the Regional Task Force on Homelessness. I worked there. I was the Continuum of Care lead that won the funds. And the Continuum of Care is an entity that administers homeless funding throughout the country. The dollars have to be used for housing and services. So they have what's called permanent supportive housing, which is a long-term, permanent housing program that will allow people to stay there permanently and receive supportive services. They also have shorter-term, time-limited housing called transitional housing or rapid rehousing, where they get you in rapidly, you get a housing subsidy for a period of time, and then they hopefully help you find work or some other source of income so that you can move on and pay rent on your own. And they also allowed funding for host homes, which was new. It is where a young person can stay with a host family, kind of like a foreign exchange student, and live there, have their own room, and the federal government actually pays for that. So that was a new innovative feature that HUD started paying for through the HUD Youth Demonstration Grant. I'm so excited to talk about this and to be a part of this, because at the time, I don't think the nation really had any idea how HUD would continue to expand on this over the years. And also how many youth demonstration communities that we've been able to help. Pat and I have been able to help several organizations apply for funds throughout California. I've been able to help some YHDP programs on the East Coast and in Hawaii to apply. So we didn't know at the time that this was going to be such a huge, initiative for HUD. So when San Diego did apply, they were awarded, and Scott Peters was the only politician to step up and offer a letter of support, which you can probably see in the slide, but it's probably really little. But basically, no other politicians came through on time to give us a letter of support for this initiative, but Scott Peters. So I want to say that because that act of kindness went a long way with us winning the grant. I love to talk about this story because it took a community to really go for this initiative. It was not just the regional task force. It was also the youth providers that, called up the task force and said, we want to go after this. We need your help. So it was a true partnership. And it was San Diego Youth Services, one of the largest youth providers in San Diego. They serve about 25,000 kids a year. And they said, we applied for it last year. We need you guys to be the lead. The funding needs to go to the Continuum of Care. Can you partner with us? Can you help us with this? We will help supply, letters of support. We'll supply some funding towards it. We will, to match the grant, we will, help bring in some grant writers. So it was not, just one entity. It was really a community effort. The San Diego Housing Commission helped write the grant. It was, really good people that came forward. So we wrote the grant. I took the grant and handed it over to our chief operational officer, which at the time was Tamara Kohler, who's now the CEO of the Regional Task Force on Homelessness. And I said, okay, the grant is done. And she goes, well, what do you think? I said, well, if, we have to go all in. We don't know how much we're going to get. They didn't tell us in the application how much money it would be. If we're going to do this, we just either got to do it. So she took the grant application and she opened up her desk and she put it in her drawer. And I was like, okay, she closed her drawer, not knowing that a couple months later, HUD was going to call and say, you just won $8 million and we're flying in to do a press conference here in San Diego. So it was a big deal. The CEO at the time, which was Gordon, he was like, what did you guys write? And I was like, I don't know. We need to pull it out and remember everything we said we were going to do. Because, we had said we were going to solve youth homelessness. I mean, what else can I say about that? And we created some really cool initiatives out of that. So getting the money and really having an opportunity to write a plan was one of the things that I don't know if San Diego has ever done. HUD required that we will give you this $8 million, but you will write a federal strategic plan to end youth homelessness for the region. And you will take 9-10 months to do that before we give you $1. So we had to focus, we had to meet, we had to have youth at the table the entire way. I probably should have said that from the beginning. The youth helped write the grant. They were at the table. We hired a young person. I was in AmeriCorps. We brought her in for her subject matter expertise. She had lived experiences of homelessness. She had been in the child welfare system. She was on probation. She was on federal parole. Like, she had everything, every type of lived experience. And we hired her and she helped us to be the voice for youth. We also had to have 8 young people sign a letter saying that we could even apply for the funds. So it was really, really youth-led. So the youth helped us to write the coordinated community plan to end youth homelessness with our partners. Child welfare, thank you, was actually a threshold partner that had to be at the table for us to even apply for the funds. So we put together a child welfare work group. We put together a justice work group. The Department of Education came in from the federal level and put together an educational work group of stakeholders that are still meeting to this day and solving youth homelessness in our communities at the educational level. So really, really proud of that. Through the CCP development, we had 5 different TA providers, 2 that were administrative that HUD paid for and gave us to help us to write the plan. 2 that were dedicated to the youth, which was True Colors Foundation, and 1 that was with the Department of Education at the federal level to help us with the educational stakeholders. We met for hours weekly. The adults met 5 hours a week, which is a lot, 5 hours a week to get on people's calendars. And then the youth met about 5 hours a week. And then we brought our ideas together to come up with this plan, which we will provide a copy of the slide, and the link to the plan is in the slide. On the left, you can see our Youth Action Board members. These young people are nothing short of amazing. I can't even begin to tell you how proud I am of these young people. Some of them have gone on to do technical assistance nationally. They are employed youth systems directors. In the photo on the left, they did a whole series of work with the Chelsea Clinton Foundation around trauma-informed care so that they could teach and train adults on how they want to be treated. So those youth, if I could, that to me is just the epitome of why we did this work. And so I'm going to close, but before I do, I want to say, from this one federal initiative, the things that I know about, and I still believe there's a lot of great things going on that I don't know about, but the things that I know about that happened from this one federal initiative with a tiny group of individuals saying, we want to do this, we know we can do this, we want to serve young people, and getting $8 million. That $8 million was to house and provide supportive services for 1,050 youth over the 2-year demonstration. And then the money gets split in half. So San Diego now gets an appropriation from HUD $4 million annually going forward in perpetuity. So Scott participating back then is still helping out now because we are still using those funds to provide housing and services for youth. So we received 19 units from the San Diego Housing Commission to support youth, because once the plan was wrote, all the governments went down the same direction to work on the plan. So the San Diego Housing Commission came forward with 19 units valued at about $3.5 million. They also opened up the first youth shelter that we didn't have. We did not have a youth shelter in San Diego other than a shelter for minors. It was like a pool bed facility, but they opened up a 38-bed shelter for youth. The San Diego Housing Commission did that. The Education Work Group, which is our local community colleges and higher education, San Diego State, UCSD, USD, all of the large colleges. UCSD bought out their own dorms to house homeless youth. When they ran out of dorms, they started Airbnb-ing youth that were vicariously housed. And they have still continued on with youth homelessness initiatives. That was just at that point. USD decided to allow homeless youth to stay on campus during breaks and holidays, which prior to that, they would close the campus and say, you guys all have to go. And our young people were living in cars and couch surfing and living wherever they could. USD decided, you know what, we're going to let you stay on campus during these breaks and holidays. So it was just a change of mindset. We are the first in the nation here in San Diego to get the early childhood care providers I think we're off the slides right now, just so you know, Rachel. We were the first in San Diego to get the early child care providers, preschool Head Start, to prioritize homeless youth. So that wasn't done before anywhere in the nation. HUD also allowed us to use our funding to serve youth that were homeless under other federal definitions. You still have the Zoom slide up, just so you know, Rachel. So they allowed us to, I think you just need to minimize that one. Yeah, there you go. So they allowed us to use the funds to serve youth that may be homeless under other federal definitions, which HUD doesn't like to do. They want you to be homeless under HUD's definition. They allowed us to use category 3, which basically says youth that may be homeless under another definition, we will allow you to serve them in a small capacity, 10% of youth. And when they opened that up for San Diego, we fought to get that. It was not easy. It took us several months for HUD to say yes to that. And when they said yes to San Diego, they said yes to the entire country. So we were a national spotlight for category 3 homelessness. We are I don't want to say the first, but San Diego piloted some host homes, which that was not a norm here. And the County of San Diego Office of Homeless Solutions, through the leadership of Omar Passons, who is the former director, decided to fund 100 youth with housing and services. And since then has continued on serving. It's called Housing Our Youth. It's a Housing Our Youth project. And they now use state funds to continue serving youth, which right now they're serving 500 youth over the next 5 years with housing and services and subsidies. So make a long story short, the plan that you see there in the middle, it is still alive and breathing. It's not 2024 yet. And there is a working group that has continued to work on updating that plan to make it a real life approach, because a plan is a plan, right? But if you don't implement it and you don't take it off the shelf, and you don't dust it off and you don't keep it live and active, that's what it'll stay, a plan. But no, it's been implemented. There's a committee that's continued to work on it. The committee includes, it's youth led. It's actually led by youth. It's actually led by David Baker, who's in that photo right there, the tall guy. He leads the Youth Action Board. I don't want to say the Youth Action Board, but the Coordinated Community Plan Work Group. So the plan is still active and living to solve youth homelessness in San Diego. I think we would have got a lot closer to solving youth homelessness if COVID didn't hit. I think we're still struggling with that somewhat, but I do know this has done a tremendous amount of work for San Diego, as well as other communities that have received those funds. And I'm going to stay excited about this one for the rest of my life. It's definitely a feather in my cap, helping to solve youth homelessness for San Diego. So I'll stop there, and then we're going to open it up for any questions, comments, etc.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in before we do what other topics would you like and what questions do you want, to make a couple of points. One is that I hope you understood one of the messages that Dr. Hill was delivering is that partnerships count. Working together as community counts tremendously in federal applications. So when you think about going after a grant, look around the community, find out whether the partners have the same mission or the same core values and interest in a population or in a service, and become partners in building a better, stronger application, right? They become, rather than becoming a competitor, they become a partner and increase your opportunity to be funded. That's one. The second thing I want to just address very quickly is that, as I noted along the way, just today, just this morning, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development released their 2023 NOFO for the continuum of care for homeless housing and services across the nation. The applications are due to HUD on September 28th of this year. However, there's a local process that requires the local process to be done 30 days in advance of that. And so over the next couple of months, the community will be very busy applying for, evaluating, and recommending projects for funding. So in San Diego, you want to pay attention to the Regional Task Force on Homeless San Diego.org website, rtfhsd.org. Or if you were interested in solving homelessness, let's say in Riverside, it would be Housing and Workforce Solutions Department on the RIVCO website. Or in San Bernardino, it would be the Office of Homeless Services and ICH, the Interagency Coalition of Homeless. And Imperial Valley is the County of Imperial, the Imperial Valley COC. So each of the continuums of care across the nation will be responding to this particular NOFO that was just released today. So if you want to get in on the ground floor and experience the process, today's a great day to have this webinar. So with that, what other topics would you like us to address? What would you like us back up and readdress? What questions or comments would you like us to respond to for you?
To Dr. Hill and Dr. Leslie, how would you ladies recommend that communities they build those connections so that when the time comes, in one big voice, they can get the federal funding?
So how do they build connections in their partners in the local area?
Yeah, how would you recommend they go about doing that?
So I'll give a suggestion and then I'll let Dr. Hill jump in, is that you, if you're already active in the community, know who your competitors are or know who else serves the group that you're interested in or the area that you're interested in, right? So if you're interested in housing and you haven't done housing or shelter before, go to the task force website and look up shelter, homeless shelter, housing. Look for your housing authorities, right? Look for your partners in the community that advertise similar services. Call 211, look at 211's registry of services. All of those are avenues to find new and different partners if you aren't aware of them already. But if you're engaged in the community, you probably know other organizations that have helped to serve or that clients have been referred to. So those are some of the ways to begin. Dr. Hill.
I'll probably just mention too that the HUD youth dollars did fund 7 agencies. It wasn't just the task force. The task force gets the money from HUD and then gives that out to the community. So it funded several youth providers. The task force also has a board meeting that they have once a month, and it's a great networking opportunity to meet other homeless and housing service providers. That would be a good way to network. They also have several working committees, and they always need good people on those working committees to show up. They have them, committees for different purposes. They have a data committee. They have the Committee on Black People Experiencing Homelessness. They have, Pat, help me out here.
One of the ones I was going to mention is the general meeting, which is the large community-wide, lots of information about what's happening, including updates on funding sources that happens on the second Thursday of every month at 10:30 in the morning via webinar, kind of via Zoom. So it's a really good one to not only catch up on what's happening, but also to get training and find new partners.
And it's not just federal resources that they administer. They have a ton of funds. I think over $50 million from the state. So there's state dollars as well. And they also have some private dollars. I believe they got a big grant from Bezos, like $5 million. So the task force has some good money, you know, and then also you're going to have your local government there, the city, the county. They also have their own funds and fund many different entities. The Housing Commission funds entities. So with that being said, you got to network and start getting out there and meeting people in the space. You can also specialize. So say you want to do housing, but you only want to do women. Well, then you want to meet some of the organizations that are working with women, because you can't help every single woman, right? So you want to work with other organizations that can backfill or that you can partner with and piggyback your services. Maybe you want to work with veterans, then you want to connect to some of the veterans groups. So you have to first kind of think about, okay, what do I want to do? And then decide who you should network with and get knowledge around those topics.
So as Dr. Hill mentioned, unaccompanied women under Assembly Bill 914 are now a priority for state funding. So if you're interested in housing women, you may want to take a look at, is there a way to partner federal resources with state resources, since the state has prioritized unaccompanied women, women without children, as a priority population. And that's the kind of strategic thinking, along with building partnerships, that will make you successful.
Yes, and like right now, another huge population, our data in San Diego is saying that our seniors need help. It's just a growing, problem that we have more and more seniors falling into homelessness, living on the streets longer, often complicated with healthcare challenges. And so that's a population that I could see our local government saying, and they just did put money towards helping senior homelessness. So, I mean, there's many different ways you could go about it, but I say get involved. And then if you don't know what you want to do, you can decide from there after you start to get to know people, and then figure out who you think you should partner with, and take on those networking opportunities to learn more.
And what is your process like for requesting letters of support, for writing the grant? Where do you begin?
That's a big question, right? Where do I begin? Because it can be, overwhelming. That's why I put the Finding Nemo guy in the slide, because sometimes it is like Finding Nemo. But once you find Nemo, you found Nemo. I mean, that's pretty much what that comes down to. If you don't do grant writing, you most likely want to either partner with a grant writer or hire a grant writer, because it will show in your application if you don't know how to grant write. Sometimes governments do want smaller organizations or organizations that don't have huge capacity to apply for things. So I would say still try. But if you find you're out there and you need some help, grant writing is a technical ability. People go to school for that, right? They learn it, and you don't want to just be out there trying to figure it out on your own. Like I said, either partner with an organization that can do it, or hire a grant writer. And what was the second part of that question?
Your process for requesting letters of support for the grant package.
Yeah, so letters of support are always a kind of, I don't want to say a point of contention, but Pat and I think have learned, and Pat, you can chime in here. We like to draft them ourselves and just say, hey, can you sign this? Or, add, change it, whatever you want to do, instead of just saying blank sheet, write me up something. You've got to put in the letter what you need. And so as grant writers, we often draft them ourselves and say, here's a draft, feel free to change, add, delete, do whatever you got to do, and sign and get it back to us by a certain day. If you're dealing with government, you want to try to get it to them as quickly as humanly possible, because a lot of times that letter has to go through a lot of bureaucracy to get a signature. I can say that now because I no longer work for the government. But it's true. It's like, okay, I got to ask Bob, and Bob has to ask Sally, and Sally has to ask Joe, who, and brief Joe on, can you sign this? And sometimes that can take weeks, and sometimes it does not happen on time. So if it does call for letters of support or commitment, you want to get those things done as soon as possible, as soon as you get the grant in your hand, and start getting that information out there to those partners. And draft it yourself if at all possible.
Yeah, and part of that drafting process is also giving the information to the person who will be signing it about why they should be supporting it, right? So in San Diego, we have championed this, we have this level of need, we have this level of success. Compared to other places in the nation, Southern California has 40% of all of the unsheltered homeless, or whatever it is that is going to help be convincing, not only to the recipient of the letter, but to the author of the letter. Oh, this is why I can, in confidence, offer my support, right? And so even if you don't draft that letter, if you have key points to offer, that's very helpful. I would say identify the staff person that will help you along the way. So Rachel said she is in the grants division, so there's one name for you to hang on to. And as Dr. Hill said, make sure you plan early. So at least 30 days in advance, if at all possible.
And also make sure who should be signing that letter. So for example, if they say child welfare has to be a threshold partner, meaning you cannot apply without them, then you need somebody from child welfare to sign that letter. You can't have somebody from workforce sign a letter for child welfare. So you've got to make sure that you have the appropriate person signing the letter. And then also, if you can get a commitment out of them, like they'll commit a staff member, they'll commit staff time, they'll commit funding, whatever it is, it's even better for the grantor, right? They want to see that there's partnerships and those partners are committed.
And like business resumes, keeping a letter of support to one page is helpful because there's also quite often package limits in terms of the number of pages that can be submitted. And so one page to the point with the evidence that makes it convincing about why the letter should be written and can be signed and why this application should be funded, and bring in your partners. So those are just some global pieces of how to move forward.
And as someone who helps write the letters here in the office for these federal grants, it is super helpful for our team to get a first draft of the letter from the askee, because it's a little bit like baking a cake. You can definitely bring out the flour, the eggs, the leveling agent, but it's going to go a lot quicker if you guys provide the box mix, and then I can add the sprinkles, the meringue icing, and make it look good and make it fit our office and why we really care and why we're, while we're rooting for you guys. So just from our point of view, because I'm definitely not an expert on housing or, the biotech that I've written, all that stuff. I'm not an expert. A lot of these folks, you guys have been here for many years. Out of me. So it does really help. I can attest to that and really set us up for success, give us a lot of time. Things happen. So we really do want to help you guys. So help us help you. So just from my point of view, from my vantage point.
Well, I think unless there are other pressing questions, I just really want to thank you, Rachel, for helping to make this possible, and for the congressman for inviting us and being willing to support housing. As he said, housing is a critical issue, particularly in Southern California, and everyone needs housing, right? Even if you're a camper, on occasion you want to come in, right? So very important. We're here to support. We're here to provide additional support if you need it along the way, but just to get you thinking and just to get members of the community registered for some of the key resources moving forward. So thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Thank you, Dr. Leslie, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Can I just add one thing? Yes, thank you. echo all the sentiments that Dr. Leslie just said. And we were so fortunate to come here and talk to you guys today. But I also want to just say something about Scott Peters, because I'm not the political type of person, but he will get my vote any day of the week. And so I just want to leave that there, because he put his stamp on youth homelessness. He's also worked with us on veterans homelessness. And I know he has a commitment to this community, and that's sometimes far and few between with our politicians. So he gets my stamp of approval 7 days of the week.
Yeah, he also
thank
helped
you.
lead a congressional charge and lead a charge of mayors across the nation and trying to get some of the formulas changed to make it a more equitable formula across the US to get more resources into our community. And so, again, really much appreciated. We feel that there is a partnership here, and that's a wonderful place to be. So thank you.
Thank you both for your time today. I really appreciate it. Okay, take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.